I'm very excited. You know, our book club was on hiatus, and I had to bring back the book club to do this book. So I don't know. I think some of you who were emailing me how much you were enjoying the book. Mm-hmm. So some of you maybe haven't read it. So we're going to do a drawing for the book. If you've already bought the book, I have another book I can send to you. But yeah, we'll do that at the end. So yeah, just a fantastic. I've always had a soft spot for this team, but just the cast of characters. And one of our members said it kind of reads like a novel, which I really think it does. Sort of like the Doris Kearns Goodwin sort of thing, you know, with history. Especially like Satchel Paige's debut. I thought I was just riveted by it.
Yeah.
As well as other things. And even the intro, you kind of got into August 20th, 1948. And I mean, I just got hooked on that. And just on the intro. So if you haven't read the book, all of you who are attending here, I really recommend it. But why don't we just get started? And I guess we always start these things with the origin story. Like, how did you get into this sort of merging? I know they're not bios, but just merging stories.
Well, thank you very much. That's great to hear you liked it. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to talk a little bit longer on this one because it's sort of a winding road to get there. I'm from a small town down by St. Louis. I grew up a huge Cardinal fan. My grandpa, however, was a huge fan of the St. Louis Browns. I think a lot of people know that up until like 1954 or 5 or whatever, the St. Louis had 2 Major League Baseball teams, the Cardinals, who were usually pretty good, and the Browns, who were usually pretty terrible. My grandpa was an odd man in that he liked the Browns. And so I grew up hearing about the Browns more so than a lot of people in that area, because the Browns had left long after I'd been born. And I guess anybody who knows anything about the Browns knows that Bilveck was the last owner of the team. He did a lot of his most notorious stunts there. He brought a little person to the plate. He had people managed from the grandstands. He shot off fireworks, the whole thing. So I was always kind of obsessed with Beck growing up. I'd read Beck as in Rec when I was a kid. And I think that I picked up Beck as in Rec again later on, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, and reread it and thought to myself that there hasn't been sort of a rollicking story of Beck and the Browns. And so that's what I really wanted to do, to sort of honor my grandpa. And because I knew that, I knew St. Louis very well. And that was the original intention of the book. So I spent probably 6 months researching the Browns, trying to figure out my angle to it. And if you go into the New York Public Library, they have bound editions of the Sporting News. This is the great baseball publication from early on. So I checked out the years 1946, 47, 48, and 49. These were the years whenever Bilveck owned the Cleveland Indians. And I thought I was just doing sort of background research on Bilveck, trying to catch up on who this person was, what was he like before he owned the Browns. And so I was sort of flipping through the physical copies of the Sporting News. And while trying to find articles on Beck, I was obviously seeing other articles about the Cleveland Indians, and all these names started coming to the fore: Bob Feller, Satchel Paige, Larry Doby. And it was just through sort of reading the Sporting News like a novel that I started to see how these 4 men fit together. And you could tell a very interesting and sort of alternate history of the integration of baseball through these 4 individuals, because they each sort of represented a different facet of the integration experience. You've got Bilveck being the sort of progressive white owner who is sort of pushing the envelope. You got Bob Feller, who is a bit more of a traditionalist when it came to his views, even though he was barnstorming all around with Black players. And then in Larry Doby and Satchel Paige, you have sort of people on the opposite end of a generational spectrum of the Negro Leagues. And so they encompass just a wide range of years in the Negro Leagues, to the extent that they had different worldviews that they were grown up in. So it was really through that I came to this story. I had no connection to Cleveland. I don't think I'd ever been to Cleveland. I didn't know anything about these stories. I barely knew who Larry Doby was, but it was through that sort of research that I abandoned the Browns and said that the Indians are where it's at. Excellent.
Yeah. Well, it's just the characters, and it's like all these moving parts that you put together beautifully. Yeah, Feller and, so I was always into Satchel Paige and Larry Doby, Bilveck. Did you draw a lot from Paul Dixon's Bilveck book as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many rich texts with Bilveck. He, wrote several autobiographies. He has, he also wrote sort of several newspaper and magazine articles about his time in the Indians. And then of course, Paul Dixon's book is magisterial. One of the things that I wanted to do in this book was to not make it be a biography of these four men. I didn't want to sort of tell their story sort of comprehensively through their time. I really wanted it to be sort of like, I wanted it to be more like the intersection of these characters. And so I originally had the book start in 1947, and then I started noticing that these men were, if not directly coming in contact the way that like Bob Feller and Satchel Paige were, they were having experiences that sort of rhymed. And so you look at sort of Bob Feller goes into the Navy, Larry Doby goes into the Navy, and they have just they have vastly different experiences in the Navy. And I don't think that they ever kind of cross in the Navy. They're in the same general vicinity of the South Pacific, but there's no indication that they would have ever sort of inhabited the same island or anything like that. But they were having sort of experiences that were sort of in common or rhyming. And I thought that you could sort of build the narrative up just by sort of focusing on those scenes and experiences where they either intersect directly or intersect sort of experientially. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do, rather than doing what Paul did in his book, which was just this wonderful, extremely comprehensive, biography of Bilveck. I wanted mine to be sort of more, I guess, as you said, sort of novelistic, more of a narrative that has this tremendous forward momentum.
Yeah, and because Bob Feller, I was never really a big fan, but he's actually kind of fascinating. Just like, yeah. I mean, it's funny because, they had players that were heavily marketed, of course, like, Christy Mathewson, Babe Ruth, but yeah. Bob Feller seemed to be like was he like the first entrepreneur in baseball? Well, I don't know if he's the first, but he really embraced it.
Ruth did a really great job of marketing himself. And, I mean, I think you could look at other examples, but Bob Feller was so nakedly opportunistic when it came to business ventures. And I think that there's many things about Feller that I think that people either misread or have their views colored because of things that he's either said or done. He became a rather irascible figure later in life. He made a lot of statements that perhaps he should not have made, or perhaps should have thought a little bit more deeply about. And I also think that like his own sort of narrative, this farm boy coming up out of the middle of nowhere, training on a sort of field of dreams, making it onto the Indians at age 17, immediately setting strikeout records. It really kind of colored our perception of him, because then we sort of wanted to think about him as this, very folksy, down home, sort of all-American boy. Whenever I don't think that's what he was at all. I think his dad was a tremendously entrepreneurial farmer. They had one of the few tractors in the county. During the Great Depression, his dad was buying up tons of property, tons of farmland, tons of garages, tons of businesses. His dad was a very cold-hearted businessman. I mean, cold-hearted not in a negative sense, just like cold-hearted in terms of being a capitalist. And I think that Bob Feller inherited that, and they cloaked themselves in this sort of idea of them being these simple farmers because that was what the media wanted to portray them as during the Great Depression. But Feller always had that capitalistic sense to him. And it was really when he came back from the war that he sort of threw away the simple farm boy image and just completely, incorporated himself, embraced it, and then became kind of almost like the man in the gray suit, or in the gray flannel suit. Like he turned from sort of the all-American boy of the Great Depression to the sort of post-war entrepreneur, just seamlessly. Like he had that sort of morphing ability about him. And so, yeah, I mean, he was just so ahead of his time. I mean, there was an article from the 1970s that I found where, I think it was in the Los Angeles Times, where he's going around to minor league stadiums. He's long since retired, and he's setting up a card table, and he just puts a sign up that says Bob Feller, $10 autographs. And the person who's writing the article is very negative. He's like, what is this legend doing? Like he's this is not dignified. This is not something that he should be doing. Why is he in, I don't know, in Arizona signing autographs for $10 at a minor league stadium? And I mean, the guy just didn't understand. Feller was ahead of his time. Everybody does that now. He's always kind of on the cutting edge of finding ways to profit off of his name. And he was that way since he was a teenager, and he learned it from his dad. And I think it's just that whole sort of narrative that he cultivated about the Field of Dreams and all that sort of stuff that didn't allow us to see just what an incredibly smart person he was.
Amazing. And Satchel Paige, Peter and I were talking about, like, Satchel Paige, you read about him and then you just want to read about him more because, again, kind of a dichotomy. He's kind of the sleepy country boy, but you really think there's a lot more there.
Yeah, I mean, Satchel Paige is like the perfect. I mean, I know that a lot of people put Satchel Paige and Dizzy Dean together because their personalities seem to match, and their sort of, their sort of outgoingness seems to match. But I really think that Satchel Paige and Bob Feller are a better match together, just because I think for as entrepreneurial and businesslike as Bob Feller was, Satchel Paige was just that much more. Because, I mean, think about the way that he came up during the Great Depression at a time whenever the Negro Leagues were in collapse, in a time of just absolutely ironclad Jim Crow laws and things like that. And he turns himself into sort of a one-man franchise that is making as much as any major league superstar is, without any of the advantages that someone like Bob Feller had and any of these sort of avenues that Bob Feller has to make money off of his name. Yet he crosses over into the sort of white mainstream way before integration actually happens. He manages to do this kind of on his own. It's just an incredible amount of, it's incredible amount of savvy, incredible amount of sort of just entrepreneurialism. I mean, we talk about Michael Jordan and like how he built up his sneaker industry into $1 billion industry, which is extremely impressive. But I don't think it's as impressive as what Satchel Paige was able to do to build himself up during the Depression into this sort of superstar that could cross not only, all over the United States physically, but cross racial lines into sort of the white mainstream. I mean, it's an incredible feat that he did. And I think it's superior to anything that Bob Feller was able to do.
Absolutely. I'm always amazed by it because it's like he was almost impervious to, I'm sure he dealt with a lot of racism, but he didn't, I don't know, I haven't read enough about Satchel Paige, but it just seemed like he got away with a lot more than other Black people do. He got away with speeding through little towns down in the South because he was kind of a celebrity, I guess. And maybe that's the idea of celebrity in this country, where he seemed to get away with a lot more for that time.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the most interesting thing about that point is that, whenever Larry Doby comes in, he's given the exact same speech that Branch Rickey gave to Jackie Robinson, that, you're to turn the other cheek, you're not to sort of fight back, you're supposed to, take your lumps and just kind of, maintain your calm, or else, you could jeopardize this supposedly fragile experiment of integration. Satchel Paige is not given that speech. And even if he was, like, there wasn't any indication that he would have necessarily followed it. Like, he comes into Major League Baseball and doesn't seem to change his ways. He's late for trains, he misses buses, like he's, a lot of Black publications at the time were wringing their hands, being like, this is not the sort of way that we want to showcase African-American athletes. But Paige was just who he was. And it took incredible strength for him to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And just the contrast between him and Larry Doby, they were two different people, even though I guess they were supposed to room together,
Supposedly they did. I mean, Doby said that he roomed with Paige's luggage instead of Satchel Paige, but yeah, I mean, Doby had this sort of, Doby, the word that Doby always used was dignity. He was always trying to be dignified, all this sort of thing. And he looked at Satchel Paige, and he saw a sort of stereotype that gave comfort to white fans, and that sort of presented the Black athlete as performer or even clown or something like that. I mean, this whole sort of step and fetch it stereotype that a lot of white fans saw in Satchel Paige, and that was the exact sort of thing that Larry Doby was trying to counter, or trying to just get rid of altogether. And so he was, you know, he didn't appreciate the sort of humor that Paige used to diffuse situations. He didn't appreciate the way that Satchel Paige didn't seem to conform to the major league standard that Larry Doby was trying to conform to. And so they just didn't get along. And Doby, even later in his life, you can read interviews with him in the 90s, he's still kind of harping about how Satchel Paige was bad for integration. It was something that Doby just doesn't really get over.
Yeah, interesting. So I'd like to open it up to questions, because I'm dying to hear what questions others have. Just before, you know, so we're the Ken Keltner chapter here in Milwaukee. So there's not much you wrote about Ken Keltner. I guess he really wasn't. But do you have any thoughts on him, just because we're the Keltner chapter?
I mean, I think the thing about this book is that I know a lot of people think it's about the 1948 Indians, and I guess it kind of is, but they don't really come into the book until the last third of it. It's really about these four men. And so I had to make a lot of choices. I didn't have enough time to go into people like Ken Keltner or Dale Mitchell or even Gene Bearden, really. I mean, I don't really have time to get into those sort of figures. Ken Keltner is interesting because Bilveck is constantly trying to trade him. As soon as Beck buys the team in 46, he's dangling Ken Keltner to a number of teams. In particular, I think he's dangling him to the Washington Senators. He's really trying to get a guy named Stan Spence, who is a center fielder. This was before he knew that Larry Doby was going to blossom into this incredible center fielder. So he's using Ken Keltner as bait for like 2 seasons, for the 1946 offseason and then the 1947 offseason. And he's just unable to basically unload him. And so Keltner is having a little bit of a tough time with that. He doesn't have as good of a season as he wants to in 1947. And I think that probably everybody knows this story, but I'll just tell it. But Bilveck, before the 1947 season, he's unsuccessful in trading Ken Keltner in 1946. Before the 1947 season, he tells Keltner that if you get, I don't remember the exact numbers, something like 20 home runs, 80 RBIs, and you bat over 280, I'm going to give you this big bonus, this big sort of bonus. And Keltner doesn't make those numbers. Keltner, I don't exactly remember his stats, but he falls short on each one of those stats. And so he leaves for Wisconsin after the season for the offseason. And about 5 days later, Bilveck calls Keltner and says, "Hey, why didn't you come see me before you left? We have to talk about that bonus." And Keltner said, "Well, what do you mean? I didn't hit the numbers. I don't get the bonus." And Veck said, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You hit the ball so hard and you were the most unlucky man in the major leagues. Like, you know, I would say I was keeping track of all of the times you were at bat and all the times you were hitting the ball right directly to people whenever they should have been hits. So as far as I'm concerned, you hit those numbers." And within a week, a big bonus check arrived in Keltner's mail. And Keltner then said that was like this tremendous boost for him to come back in 1948. He was like, "I'm going to just play my heart out for him." And he has this incredible season that really helps the Indians make it into the World Series that year. So Veck, I mean, that it also sort of speaks to Veck's, you know, incredible handling of these ball players. He was really tried to, you know, befriend the ball players and make himself accommodating to them, even though he's spending off seasons trying to unload Keltner. He then sort of can diffuse that with this bonus check.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Great Bilveck story and Ken Keltner story. So yeah, Larry Doby, you know, it's, you know, you would talk about Jackie Robinson and, you know, such a triumph, of course, you know, he was the first. But some people think what Larry Doby, you know, like a lot of people thought Hank Aaron breaking the Sally League, integrating the Sally League was probably harder because it was a different community than Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But anyway, Larry Doby, I mean, that was very difficult. And I think Bilveck helped him a lot, but just what a story.
Yeah, I mean, Doby, he had several strikes against him that Robinson maybe didn't. I mean, he had 18 months from the time he was signed to the time he debuted on the Dodgers to go through the minor league system, go through 2 spring trainings, and sort of prove himself and just acclimate to all white spaces and have his white teammates acclimate to the idea that the Dodgers were going to be integrated soon. And obviously Robinson was 5 years older. He was nationally known from his time at UCLA as a football player, and he's playing in Brooklyn, which, New York City is the media capital of the country at that time and probably still. And so everything he did that season in 1947 was traced and recorded and things like that. And so in some ways that insulated a little bit of what could happen to him. Whereas Larry Doby is 5 years younger. He's 23. He doesn't know. I mean, nobody really even knows who he is in white baseball. He's given no acclimation period whatsoever. He plays a game for the New York Eagles, boards a train, and the very next day he's on the Indians. I mean, it's such a shock to his system. He says that he could not stop his teeth from chattering the first sort of 10 at bats that he goes up for the Indians. And he's playing in Cleveland, which is, not quite the media capital of the country. And he's not getting regular playing time. So the press loses a little bit of interest in him after about a month. And so he's going through similar sorts of isolating, racially charged experiences that Robinson would have gone through, but he's going through them in more sort of anonymity than Robinson is, not with the sort of spotlight on him that could sort of insulate what is happening. So I do think in some ways Larry Doby's path was, I don't know if it was harder, but it was much different and sort of equally as challenging.
I agree. Does anybody have any questions?
I
For
do.
Luke.
Can you hear me? This is Perry Barber.
Hi, Perry.
Hey, Perry.
Hi. I'm in my car, driving from New York, which I left day before yesterday, on my way to Phoenix, where I'll be tomorrow. So, Luke, I listened to your book on audio while I was driving.
Cool.
And I got to tell you, it reads like a thriller. And I am particularly grateful to you because it's so rich with description and but not just extraneous fluff description. You get into like people's hearts and souls, especially a couple of the peripheral characters, Effa Manley, and his teammate, was it Lou Gordon, Sid Gordon?
Joe Gordon.
Joe Gordon.
Gordon,
Yeah.
Joe Gordon,
right.
Yeah.
That I knew so little about, but you just humanize them so much and turn them into such really wonderful characters to get to know. And I wanted to thank you for doing that, especially with Effa Manley. She was almost as integral to your narrative as the 4 main characters. And I just thought it was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I would say 2 things about that. One, the reason why I wrote the book the way that I did, rather than, because I really kept the focus very tight on that season. I don't really sort of zoom out or be like, and this is why this is important or something like that. I kept the narrative very tight on that year. And I think it's because one of the reasons why I feel like we've forgotten a little bit about Larry Doby and, the first integrated team to win the World Series is because the narrative has been lost a little bit. Like we know Larry Doby is kind of a trivia question, who's the second Black player in Major League Baseball. And I think that like, we don't get this sort of sense of just how exciting that year was and how sort of just bananas Cleveland went for that team. And not only Cleveland, but just the country. I mean, they, especially once Satchel Paige came onto that team, they just captivated the United States. And, Bilveck he could have ran for president that year and probably won. And so I wanted to capture the excitement. And so I figured that the only way to do that would be to keep the focus very tight on these characters and tell it as though it was a novel and they're going through it right now. And
Well,
so
you
that's,
did a great job of that.
yeah,
And I love the anecdote about Joe Louis giving up his hotel room when
yeah.
F. Hanley decided to go to the World Series in 1948 because she couldn't get a decent hotel room.
Yeah,
I
and
mean, stuff like that. It just makes the book so wonderful.
I would say with F.M. Manley, well, I would say two things about F.M. Manley. One, and I said this earlier to this group, but I had 30 extra pages on F.M. Manley that I'd written in the Newark Eagles. And my editor very wisely told me that, this isn't quite the story you're telling. And I was like, well, can we make F.M. Manley a fifth character? And he's just like, I think you need to stick to 4. And he was right. I'm not saying he was wrong, but I had so much more on F.M. Manley. Her papers are at the Newark Public Library. She not only kept every letter that was sent to her, she made copies of the letters that she sent out to people. And so we have both the correspondence that came from her and that she received, including letters from Satchel Paige, letters that she wrote to Satchel Paige. We have letters that she wrote to Larry Doby trying to get him to sign. And
that angry letter that she sent him,
yeah,
you have not returned. Yeah.
Yeah, where she basically just kind of bullies him into signing. Like
Yeah.
But you can sort of read those letters and she's taking different strategies with different players. Like she knows that Larry Doby is younger and doesn't have the leverage of like Monty Irving, who she kind of uses. She uses kind of more flattery to get Monty Irving back. With Larry Doby, she's just like, what are you doing? It's like she's like an extremely, again, intelligent individual who sort of knows what these players need. So anyway, if you're ever at the Newark Public Library in Newark, New Jersey, there are, I think, like 10 boxes of F.M. Manley correspondence that you can sift through, and it's a joy.
Somebody definitely write another whole book about her.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah, well, thank you. Your focus is very tight on the 4 main characters, but you flesh them out by adding a little bit about these other characters too. I mean, it just reads beautifully. I loved it. Thank you. But it kept making me so mad, especially learning about Larry Doby's suffering, why his teammates didn't do more. Like, how could they let him go to a different hotel and walk to the ballpark? Him and Minnie Minoso? Oh my God. That passage about the 3 of them walking in their uniforms because they couldn't get a ride. Holy cow.
Well, I don't know if their teammates ever addressed it, but I don't know if you've ever read the book "I Had a Hammer" by Hank Aaron. That's Hank Aaron's autobiography. It came out maybe 30 years ago or something like that. And part of what that autobiography does is, in addition to Aaron's story, there are little mini chapters where they talk to certain of Aaron's teammates. And there's a little mini chapter where they talk to Eddie Matthews. And Eddie Matthews said that he remembered, I can't remember exactly, he remembered going to restaurants and Hank Aaron not being able to go in, and they would just kind of give him a sandwich or something like that, and he had to eat in the back. And he was just like, I didn't think of it at the time. Like, I was so focused on just, staying on the team and getting my own stats and all this. And he's like, now I look back on that and I was like, why in the heck did I not say, guys, we're not eating here? This isn't how it's going to be. Like, this is not, he's just like, I didn't cross my mind. And I did interview Carl Erskine, and he said something similar. He said that that for a lot of the Dodgers players, the fact that Jackie Robinson was even there and that they were friendly with him, they took that as this tremendous step. And so these other things, like Robinson not being allowed to stay at the hotel in St. Louis or in Chicago or wherever, they were just kind of like, well, that's not our problem. Like, we're doing our part, and that's not our thing there. And so that was how Erskine sort of characterized why the white players didn't speak up more.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Thanks.
And what I liked is how a couple of things on Larry Doby is that everyone kind of said, so he's the second black player, so they're all going to say, hey, welcome, and everything. Like, no, it's not going to happen. And that there were teammates that were afraid of offending their Southern teammates by being
Right.
too friendly of them. It's like, how sad is that? Then instead of saying you're one of us, one of the team, they were more afraid of offending other players on their team. So
Yeah, I think a pivotal moment in Larry Doby's thing, everybody sort of points to this when Larry Doby comes into the clubhouse on his very first day in the Indians, and several Indians players don't shake his hand or they give him a cold reception. And I do think that's important, but I think it's more important what happened the next day, where Larry Doby is given his first start and he's supposed to take the place of Eddie Robinson. Young player. I think he was 26. He'd been in the minors. He'd been in the service. This was his time now, and he really wanted to stick on the Indians. And when Robinson finds out that Doby has taken his place, he quits the team on the spot. He's just like, that's it, I'm done. And he doesn't dress for the game. He's in the clubhouse. He's off the team. And Bill McKechnie comes down and basically says, like, you don't want to do this. This is going to ruin your life. Think about what you're doing. And Robinson does, and he kind of comes back up into the clubhouse, and everybody kind of pats him on the back. And I do think that had an effect of the teammates kind of like coalescing around Robinson, and it kind of showed what could happen if you just inserted Larry Doby too quickly into the Indians lineup. And it's not, I mean, you can sort of read the newspapers at the time, and while nobody really kind of comments directly on it, you can definitely tell that was a turning point, and that Lou Boudreau only starts Doby that one game that season. And then after that, he never starts him again in 1947. And I think that Boudreau kind of saw what could happen if that would take place. And so, I think that's really a pivotal scene for that season.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. I seem to have read or have heard that when Jackie Robinson started with the Dodgers, Pee Wee Reese made a point of being friends with him on the diamond so that perhaps the fans could see, and fans could see that he was being accepted. Was anyone on the Cleveland team doing something like that for Larry Doby?
Yes, the one that Perry mentioned earlier, Joe Gordon. Lou Boudreau, as you know, was the player manager of the team. He's like 30 years old in 1948. He's really kind of overwhelmed with his duties and with kind of trying to prove to Bilveck that he deserves to be the manager. Joe Gordon is older than Lou Boudreau. He's an established veteran. He's already won the MVP. He kind of comes in and takes care of more of the sort of player issues that come up. And of course, one of them is with Doby. And since Gordon is older than these people on the team, he doesn't have to sort of prove himself or sort of fight for his spot on the roster. He feels much freer to, we were talking about how there were some teammates who thought Doby was fine, but didn't want to offend their Southern teammates. Gordon wasn't hampered by those feelings. So he embraces Doby immediately. And Doby talks about how when he was on the train and he'd be sitting alone, Gordon would come and sit next to him. Gordon would go into and sit next to him in the dugout. Gordon was really somebody who was trying to integrate Doby into the actual clubhouse culture. Doby also mentioned, when anybody asked Doby who were the sort of allies on the team, he would always mention the same people. It was Joe Gordon, number one, Bill McKechnie, the coach, who had been a wonderful manager for the Reds and other teams, but then was sort of playing out his last years on the Indians. Bob Lemon, the great pitcher, and Jim Hegan, the catcher. Doby always mentioned those four people. They were the ones that sort of embraced him without reservation.
Glad to hear it.
And I thought it was interesting that, Larry Doby was hired as a manager for the White Sox by Bilveck, and, he was eventually fired, but I think he held Bilveck in very high regard.
He did. Beck was, it's interesting. If you read a lot of interviews with Doby, especially later in his life, when he talks about Beck, he always talks about him as almost like a father. He says things like, I wish my dad were like that, or if I'd known my dad, I wish he would like Bilveck. Like you could really tell Dobie lost his father from a very early age, and his dad kind of abandoned the family a little bit. Dobie talks about how he doesn't have a lot of memories of his father because his father wasn't around very much when he was growing up in South Carolina. And so Veck kind of gets slotted into this more sort of patriarchal role, even though they're not that far apart in age. And you know, it's Veck is very sort of attuned to Dobie's sort of moods. And I guess that if he saw that Dobie was pressing or struggling or having a problem with teammates, he'd sort of swoop in, take Dobie out to dinner, they'd go listen to music and just kind of relax. Like he was really good at just kind of keeping a watchful eye over him.
Luke, I have a question. You know, Cleveland played in Municipal Stadium, giant ballpark, they had pretty good attendance.
Yeah.
I'm sure, I don't know the name, but Cleveland must have had a Negro League team then. How did the Black fans in Cleveland react to Dobie and Paige joining the team? And did they help boost that attendance? What kind of influence was there with that?
Tremendous. You're right. Cleveland did have a Negro League team. It was the Buckeyes. They won the Negro League World Series in 1945. They had great players like Quincy Troop and Sam Jethro. They were a really great team that kind of collapsed, you know, once integration happened in Major League Baseball. And that was kind of a complaint that Effa Manley talks about a little bit, that as soon as Major League Baseball started integrating, no matter how minimally they did, because, you know, there was only sort of 4 players in 1948 there for a while, Black fans immediately started turning their attention toward the major leagues, and coverage in the Negro Leagues suffered, which then caused attendance in the Negro Leagues to suffer even more. So Black fans embraced the Indians wholeheartedly. There's a game that it's very briefly in my book, but when Satchel Paige comes up in July of 1948, I think it was right after the All-Star game, perhaps, the Dodgers come to Cleveland for an exhibition game, the Dodgers and the Indians. And so all 4 Black players in Major League Baseball play in the game: Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, Satchel Paige, and Larry Dobie. And even though it's an exhibition game, has absolutely no standing whatsoever, 65,000 people show up, and out of them, I can't remember the exact percentage that they said was African-American, but they estimated that 1 out of every 6 Black residents of Cleveland was at that game. And so just incredible amount of support there, especially when Satchel Paige came onto the team. And then, I mean, my book is called Our Team because when the Indians win the World Series, there's a front page editorial on the Column Post, which is the Black newspaper of Cleveland, that declares that because Beck has integrated the team and because Larry Dobie and Satchel Paige are on the Indians are now our team. And that our team is in all caps in that editorial. And so it really kind of shows that even though the Indians had the Buckeyes, like the Indians are now our team. And so, yeah, they've very much embraced the team.
That's a great insight into the title of the book. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering, the fact that Lou Boudreau was in a circumstance that as a young manager of a team that was facing the possibility of becoming fractured due to the racial issues, what was his role, or how did he relate to Dobie away from the field, and how did Dobie feel about Boudreau after his career was over? Did he voice how he felt?
Try to be as diplomatic as possible on this answer. Dobie had very mixed feelings about Lou Boudreau. If you read newspapers at the time, Dobie is full of praise for Boudreau, but later in his life, he confided to several close friends that he really didn't think well of Boudreau at all. He felt that Boudreau did not do enough to try to integrate him into the clubhouse, that he did not sort of model the behavior that the other people should treat Doby like. He thought that Boudreau basically kind of ignored him and didn't do what he could to ease his transition. I mean, I think it's one of the sort of saddest things that I read about with Doby was, whenever he hits that home run in Game 4 of the 1948 World Series, that really kind of clinches that game and is really the pivotal game for the Indians in beating the Braves. And Steve Gromek, the pitcher, at the end in the clubhouse, just embraces Doby and has this sort of rapturous, like, you're the person that allowed me to get this win. And, it's photographed and sent across the newspapers. And it's this wonderful picture of the two of them together. And Doby says that finally a man on the Indians showed his affection for me. And you could just sense in that sort of statement that he has felt so not only isolated, but just alienated from everybody, that everybody is just kind of acting around him in a stilted manner that isn't natural and isn't human and something like that. And Gromek has this wonderfully human moment where he just sees him, this person that they gave him this World Series win that he never expected to have, and just reacts so spontaneously toward Doby. And that kind of to Doby is like the moment that he feels like he's finally made it on the Indians. And I think that he resented that Boudreau that moment didn't come sooner for him. And Boudreau, for his part, I mean, you have to understand that, like, as soon as Bilveck buys the team in 1946, he makes it very clear to Lou Boudreau that he thinks he's a wonderful shortstop, but he's not a good manager. He really thought that Lou Boudreau was a hunch manager, that if you sort of asked him why he did something, he couldn't explain it. He would just say, well, I just, thought that was the right thing to do or something. And so he really wants somebody there that has more strategy and wants Boudreau to just not be burdened with managerial duties. And so he spends 2 years basically trying to convince Lou Boudreau to step down, including to the point where he almost trades him to the Browns. And so Boudreau's under this tremendous pressure to prove to Bilveck and others that he can do this job. And then integration happens, and Boudreau's not really, he's not really in these discussions with Veck about integration. He finds out basically when the rest of the world finds out that it's going to happen. And it's this incredibly sensitive and difficult challenge that he's now going to have to shoulder, in addition to trying to save his own job. So you have to imagine that Boudreau, in some sense, might have resented the fact that then he had to deal with this on top of everything else. And so he doesn't seem to interact with Doby as much as he can, and he definitely delegates those sorts of human interactions to Joe Gordon and Bill McKechnie. And so Doby had much warmer things to say about those two men in terms of helping, and much less warmer things to say about Lou Boudreau.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how, between Feller and Paige, how I think you wrote something, let me see if I can find the quote, that fate yet again was inversely tied to Feller's, that was Satchel Paige. Did he join the team because Feller was kind of faltering? And then if Feller was doing well, they kind of, like in the World Series, they kind of underused Paige. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is definitely kind of that was purely a thesis of mine. Because if you look at, Bob Feller has a very subpar first half of the 1948 season. He's under 500 at the All-Star break, and every other Indians pitcher is doing well. Gene Bearden's pitching out of his mind. Bob Lemon's pitching out of his mind. Steve Gromek's doing well. All of these other things. And if Bob Feller had had just a normal season where he was, I don't know, he could have been like 13-9 at the All-Star break or something like that. Maybe Bilveck wouldn't have felt such urgency to bolster the team's pitching staff. But that was like the huge story in Cleveland through June and July. Like, what are we going to do with Feller? There were writers saying, you got to bench him. He's hurting us, because the Indians were sort of barely in first place for all this time. And they thought, well, gosh, if we just had a normal pitcher instead of Feller, like, we could be doing well. So I really do think that if that Feller's sort of struggles were what opened the door for Satchel Paige to come in, which, I mean, it's just incredible amount of irony that happens. And then you see in that sort of time, Paige has this incredible July, August run, and Feller himself is still struggling during that period. And so it's like whenever Paige is up, Feller is down. And then in September, they do this. Like Feller suddenly goes on this epic run where he's just winning every game, and Paige is getting knocked out of the box by like the Browns, to the point where Lou Boudreau is just not playing him anymore. And so it's like they're never sort of in balance with each other. If one's doing well, the other is falling. And so you couldn't ask for something better. Like if I'd written a novel and said like, these two men who barnstormed against each other for 12 years were sort of epic rivals on the barnstorming trail, were suddenly going to be teammates, and they were only going to be teammates because one of them was struggling, which allowed the other to come in, and then they were going up and down with each other. I was just like, this is fiction. Like this is such an incredible story. And just even then in the World Series, whenever Satchel Paige is just like, man, I hope Bob Feller just bombs out so I can get in, and like he does, and it's incredible. Like the only reason Paige gets to pitch in the World Series is because Bob Feller just, lays an egg. I don't know if I'm ever going to write another baseball book, because I don't think I'm ever going to find another story as good as this one. I mean, it's just this. It's amazing. You have these incredible figures. Bilveck is a just larger than life character. Satchel Paige is a larger than life character. Bob Feller is amazing, and Larry Doby he's a hard nut to crack, but he too is a really interesting guy. And it's just like they have this sort of almost like incredible coincidences that happen to them that get them onto this team and go on this epic run. I just really lucked out. It's amazing.
I agree. It's an incredible thesis. And yeah. So before we can keep asking questions till 8 o'clock. Just before we leave, I just want to ask if you do have a next project going.
Well, I did say that I'm worried about writing another baseball book. So I'm working on a basketball book now. That's going to be similar to this book. It's got similar sort of themes. I won't say who the characters are, but yeah, something like that. Maybe I'll go back to baseball again, but like I don't know. I just don't know if I can find 4 amazing figures like this. So we'll see.
Yeah, you started on a high note. It's not like you built up to this, because I know you do a lot of writing for The Atlantic and GQ and Slate and whatever, but this is your first book, right?
Yeah, first book.
Yeah. I mean, just really excellent. So any other questions?
I have a question. Any chance you're going to go back in the Browns?
It would be fun. I spoke at the Browns annual luncheon maybe a month ago, and so that forced me to go back into my Browns research. And I talked to this was like 5 years ago. I talked to a woman who Eddie Goodell used to be a bartender, and so I talked to a woman who worked at the same bar as Eddie Goodell, and she was 101 years old when I interviewed her. And I was just like, wow, this is a great interview. Like all this, because, Eddie Goodell didn't live very long. He was, of course, the little person that came to bat for the Browns.
Yes, he had a short life.
Yeah, he did. It's true. So, I mean, I do have interesting material there, but I don't know. It's the Browns. It would be the opposite of this book, because the Browns are just such a depressing franchise. I mean, outside of 1944, it's a tale of losing and more losing, basically.
Well, with the way I'm telling you straight up, Luke, with the way you write, you could make it interesting.
Thank you, Ryan.
I'm serious.
Thank you. I don't know if I could make the Browns interesting, but I could. I don't know. I wouldn't say never, because I have that personal connection to the team. And so I would love to write about St. Louis at some point. And the Cardinals, I just feel like have been covered to death.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to do the Browns. I don't know how I would do them yet, but maybe.
Luke, I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you think was Bilveck's main motivation for bringing Satchel Paige to the Indians? In other words, was he looking for the best pitcher that he could get? Did he think that was what Paige offered? Was it to raise attendance? Was it to appeal to the Black community? I'm just curious. I mean, he was a hustler. He didn't do things just casually. He had a motivation.
He was a self-proclaimed hustler, and like he was very proud of calling himself a hustler. And like he, during the 1946 season, whenever he took over the team, he was very transparent about the fact that he didn't think the Indians weren't going to win the pennant that year. They were out of the pennant race by the time he buys the team. And so he was like, all I want to do is basically get great attendance right now. So he's doing all of these crazy stunts. He's signing clowns, he's signing, jugglers and performers and things like that. But by the time 1947 and 48 come around, he's really focused on winning the World Series. I do think that he integrates the team primarily he really does believe that Black players are as good as white players, and that the Negro Leagues are an untapped market where he could sign players that are major league caliber, and he doesn't have to compete against any other team except for the Dodgers in getting them. And so he's very strategic about that. Now, did he also think if I signed a Black player, I would be able to get more Black fans to the game? Sure. I think that was definitely something that was in his mind, but I think that was a secondary concern. He's really, he's talked into signing Satchel Paige by Abe Saperstein, who was the guy who started the Harlem Globetrotters and was sort of a promoter of the Negro Leagues. And Saperstein is really saying to Veck, like, if you need pitching, I've got the pitcher for you. And Veck listens. And I do think that he'd seen Satchel Paige pitch as early as 1934. He'd had Satchel Paige in the back of his mind. He always booked Satchel Paige when he was in the minor leagues. Like he was somebody who was very appreciative and knowledgeable of who Paige was. So I do think that he rolled the dice on whether or not Paige had something in him. And I think that he also recognized that if Satchel Paige laid an egg, it would look bad for both of them, and the publicity wouldn't have mattered. And I think that he was somebody who thought about players, and he didn't want Satchel Paige to fall on his face. And so I think his motives were pretty pure. I think he wanted Satchel Paige to do well, and I think he thought Satchel Paige could do well. So whether or not, he knew that Satchel Paige was going to provoke a frenzy, I think he also knew that. And that was certainly welcome to him as well. But I think that was a more secondary concern.
Why would he not have encouraged the manager to use Paige a little bit more in the World Series?
Satchel Paige,
at least give him that one start that he wanted so badly.
Yeah, I think this was probably an area of my book that, I wrote a couple paragraphs that got cut. We tried to get it down to a manageable length, but I did go a little bit deeper into Satchel Paige in September of 1948. Satchel Paige wins incredible amounts of games through August. And then in September, he starts twice against the St. Louis Browns and doesn't make it through the fifth inning. He comes in relief against the Yankees and kind of gets hammered. And so Boudreau really narrows the rotation at the end of September. And since Satchel Paige seemed to have lost steam, he doesn't pitch, I think, after like September 16th or something like that. And so by the time the World Series comes around, he hadn't really thrown in quite a while. And Boudreau could have started him in Game 4. I don't really know what his reasoning was, but I think that he was worried that he was going to get the Satchel Paige of September and not the Satchel Paige of August. So I think that that's probably the reason. But it would have been a lot better for my narrative if Satchel Paige had started Game 4. So I'm a little bummed about it, but.
Yeah,
And
good point.
And that's the big stage. Satchel Paige would have probably done well. He always could get up for that. So,
I think he would have. And I think that, it would have been a magical moment. We wouldn't have had the Gromek Doby photo if Satchel Paige had started. but yeah, I think Paige rises to the occasion. I mean, he gets knocked out twice against the Browns in September, and the Browns are not the big stage. So maybe Satchel Paige just wasn't as on those nights. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was the Veck Boudreaux relationship such that Veck would have ever told Boudreaux what to do?
Well, no, I don't think so. So in the game against the Red Sox, so the Indians and the Red Sox finished the 1948 season tied for the American League. So they have to play a 1-game playoff. And Boudreaux does 2 very strange moves. One, he starts Gene Bearden, who is a left-hander, which is not a smart thing to do at Fenway Park, because you got that sort of looming green monster there that right-handed batters can just kind of feast on. And 2, he moves Allie Clark, who was a right fielder who was very limited defensively, to first base, and he sits Eddie Robinson. Allie Clark had never played first base in his life, but Boudreaux said, I wanted to load up on right-handers. And so before that game, whenever Boudreaux posts the lineup, Bilveck is so enraged that he calls Boudreaux under the stands and is like, what are you doing starting Allie Clark at first? He doesn't know how to play first. And Boudreaux's like, I just have a hunch. I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work. But Veck was kind of powerless and telling Boudreaux, like, come on, man, like, put Eddie Robinson out there. So yeah, Boudreaux kind of did what he did. But apparently, according to Boudreaux, after every game in the 1948 season, Bilveck and Hank Greenberg would sit Boudreaux down and kind of grill him. Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do this? And it just wore down Boudreaux. He was just like, I was so tired of having to explain myself. So, you know, I think they micromanaged him, but Boudreaux was his own man.
Interesting. So anything else? I'm just going through the comments. Jack said the Browns are the same franchise as the original 1901 Brewers. Yeah, there are a lot of Milwaukee connections.
Oh yeah,
with the Browns, and Bill Veck owned the minor league Brewers and really liked Milwaukee. He wanted to move the Browns to Milwaukee, but that's another story.
Yeah, gosh, we didn't even talk about Veck's time in Milwaukee, but yeah.
There's so much, yeah. Yeah.
One other comment. I thought the epilogue was excellent. I mean,
thank you.
Not to say the book wasn't, but it really brought things down to earth. It didn't really anything. Gee, everything's wonderful now, and the neighbors will all welcome him back in Patterson, New Jersey, and
yeah.
all that. And of course, none of that happened for. Well, it still hasn't happened in some ways, but
I'll try to be fast on this. But okay, so the way that I was thinking about this was that every story can be a tragedy or a triumph depending on where you end it. And so I was thinking to myself, if you end the book after the 1948 season, as it does, it makes it sound like, and then Larry Doby was good. And I was just like, that can't be the way it is, because Larry Doby struggled his entire career. And so the way I thought about the epilogue was slowly letting the air out of the tire, just kind of like fizzing down that sort of amazing season. The original title of the book was The First Fine Careless Rapture. This was a phrase that Bill Veck used. People would ask him, why don't you buy the Indians again and then try to sort of do what you did? They would say this to him in the 60s and the 70s when Bill Veck was out of baseball before he buys the White Sox again. They say, well, why don't you get Cleveland? I'm sure you could buy it for cheap. And Bill Veck would always say, you can never recapture the first fine careless rapture. And so I think what he means is that season that happened, that 1948 season when everything went right for all of these sorts of men, and it's really kind of the height of each of these individuals professionally. None of these men ever win a World Series again. It's the first fine careless rapture, and they spend their entire lives then sort of chasing that. And that's sort of what I wanted the epilogue to sort of seem like.
I thought it really did. It was a
Yeah.
good ending.
Yeah.
Not a happy ending, but a good one.
Yeah.
So any other questions? Otherwise, I'd like to do the drawing. We're going to have a book sent from Boswell Books. That's our wonderful local bookstore here in Milwaukee. So Luke, I'm going to have you pick a number between 1 and 13. I have
Okay.
13.
Let's go. Wait, what was, are there any numbers here? No, Dobie was 14.
I know, I do the same. I know, I love the number 14. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go with 8.
8. Okay, that would be Dave Clement. You won the book. No, do you have the book already, or?
No, I don't. I didn't
Okay.
want to admit that when we were talking about the book, but
No, don't.
I'm
I'm sorry
glad to
to
have it
embarrass
now.
you.
Now you're gonna get it.
Okay.
No shame here.
Thank you.
We're cool. Yeah. So do you have my email? Otherwise,
I don't think
I'll
so.
put it in the chat.
Okay. Thank
I'll
you.
put my email in the chat and we will work things out.
Okay. Thank you
So,
very much.
and yeah. I hope you enjoyed as much as we have. Yeah.
Yep.
So great book. So Ryan put a lot of great comments in the chat. So if you have time,
Sure.
read Ryan's comments.
Cool.
Yeah, you put. Thank you for your input, Ryan. So we'll let you go, Luke, unless we might stay and like Dennis calls this bar time, because usually
Okay.
when we have in-person meetings, we sit around and drink beer, and
Sure. Yeah.
we're drinking beer anyway. So you're welcome to stay, but otherwise feel free to go on with your life and
All right.
the
Well, it
great
was great
city of
talking
New
to you
York.
all. Yeah.
Luke.
Yeah. Thank you for reading, and I'm glad you all seem to like it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Luke,
Yeah, thank you.
Luke.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your contributions. Yeah, we really enjoyed it.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is fun.
Thank Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah. Mary, great job. That was the book is excellent, and I didn't think of the novel and all this, but it kept referring to characters and scenes. I'm thinking, you're right. It's it was so well written and researched, and
Yeah, well, Wally Field was the one who mentioned it, that had read like a novel, and I was like, yeah, that's so similar to other histories that have been written that way. Yeah, just so compelling. Yeah, so thank you, Wally.
Yeah, he alluded to the fact that it was easy to write because of the nature of the conflicts and the characters, and it's compelling, like a good novel.
Yeah.
It almost
he certainly
reminded me of
found the
it.
theses and involved. Yeah.
Mhm.
It reminded me of an Eric Larson historical novel, the way he interweaved different times, different people, different events, all around central themes.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many moving parts, and the way he wove them together, I thought was brilliant. Yeah.
and
So
Ryan-
like you said, he put in like even Joe Gordon. I'm glad Perry Barber mentioned Joe Gordon, because
yeah.
I thought he was an interesting character, and F. Manley, of course. Yeah.
And as Ryan said, this is his first book. What's he going to
Oh my
write
gosh.
when he learns how to become an author?
I know, right?
Yeah.
So does
Cool.
anybody want to talk about anything? Dennis, do you have any announcements or?
No announcements. I'm working with Bill on Saber Day, but we don't know what
Right.
that means yet. Everyone's been
Details later, right?
everyone's just you're busy. Everyone's just really busy. We haven't had a lot of meetings. I've just been busy with a lot of things and organizing meetings. And I have to admit that I've been reluctant to schedule meetings just because I'm getting a lot of pushback from some people that they don't like the Zoom meetings. Yet I'm not
Right.
sure I'm ready to bring people into a meeting room and see what we can give them. So I've been a little reluctant to do that. And so we have to figure that all out yet. But
Well, that was going to be my big question. That's the elephant in the room. Is it going to be virtual or in person? Bill, what do people in Chicago feel?
Well, we've been kind of kicking around a mix. We did do last summer, it was June, I believe it was June. We did do a get together at Murphy's Bleachers right by Wrigley Field. Of course, we picked the day with the little tornado warning and flooding, and we were protected by the big glass wall, that was right there. So right now we have a few different Zoom planned. We are going to try to do a lunch in January. Just a really small little get together. There's one, it's actually in my suburb where everybody can spread out a little bit more.
Sure.
But yeah, it is kind of a mix at this point in time, but still incorporating Zoom. Just it's going to give us, access to other people who wouldn't necessarily travel. But that's kind of where we are right now. So.
Yeah. The question I have is doing a hybrid, so that if you have speakers, how do you have the person on camera, and if they're standing and moving around, that's an issue. And then but having a hybrid, because we've got a lot of members who have joined us because of Zoom, and we've lost a lot of members who haven't attended the meeting because of Zoom. And so
Right.
a hybrid would probably be a good way to get them both together, just figuring out the logistics on doing a hybrid meeting.
Yeah, we haven't
Even SABR
100%
hasn't
nailed that yet.
really
So.
tried that.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
members who just, they want to go to the bar and drink beer, and, you know, I'm with them. And we could do kind of both. Like you said, we could get, so Esquire put out a list of the 100 best baseball books. I don't know if anybody else has seen
No.
that. And I thought Luke's book should be in there. It's a lot better than a lot of the books in the top 100. One of the top 100 was Isla Border's autobiography, co-written with Jean Ardell. Jean Ardell is excellent. Actually, I thought her Breaking Into Baseball book should have been in the top 100 about women's baseball. But anyway, she co-wrote Isla Border's autobiography. And I think I could possibly get them to join us. The only issue would be if it has to be a certain date, if they're available, but I can ask.
Yeah,
I
we can
ask.
work around dates. Yeah.
Yeah. But her Isla Border's book is really fascinating. In some ways, it's kind of like a tell-all book about, you know, baseball, kind of like the Jim Bouton sort of thing. Yeah. Peter, have you read Isla Border's book? I bet you.
I have not.
Yeah, I'll lend it to you. Yeah.
I have it on the pile.
Yeah, I have. I highly recommend. It's a fabulous book. But anyway, it was listed in Esquire's top 100 baseball books ever. So.
What was number one?
Oh, I don't know if they were in order. I'd have to go back and look at the list. I don't know if they were ranked.
No.
Did anybody else see the article? Yeah, you can go look.
But I don't remember.
That would be a good question. Yeah, do you rank them? Yeah, a lot of them are like the glory of their times. You know, obvious choices. Some are, But anyway,
I don't think there was
it's all
any ranking
subjective.
of them.
I'm sorry, what's that, Peter?
I don't think there was any ranking of them. They were just listed as the
I
top
think you're right.
100.
Yeah.
I
What
can-
did you
I can-
think of the list, Peter? You've read it.
There's some things I hadn't heard about before, and some classics on there I haven't gotten around to. So, you know, everyone will always have a list of their omissions, the ones they think should be on there. And but I was pleasantly surprised to see some new ones I wasn't even aware of. So, gave me something to think about.
I will include I'll go out and find the article included in the newsletter.
That'd be
And-
great. I thought it was interesting whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing is with the recording. I'm going to stop the recording so we don't need to take this further here. So thank you everybody for attending the meeting. I'll give the official ending, even though we'll stick around and talk. So I'm going to end the recording now.